With you here on Britain's Newsroom. Alastair Campbell joining me in the studio very shortly. You will know who he is. He was Tony Blair's right-hand man in opposition and in Number 10 for many years. He's written two interesting books which are trying to engage young people in the political process. So he's presumably going to have very strong views on whether we should get the vote for at the age of 16. I'm also going to be talking to him about the conduct of the general election, whether it is the conduct of politicians which is most important. What are the big issues, and he'll be joining me very shortly in the studio, and he might even have his books with him. And in fact, he's arriving in the studio very shortly. We've known each other, I would think, probably for, God, I hate to say this, 30 years. And I don't think we've knowingly agreed on anything in those 30 years, except the point of lively debate. And here he is, Alastair Campbell, in the studio. You've got the right colours on, Alastair.
I know, it's
brand new, fabulous new...
No, it's to match the colour of my book.
Oh, OK.
Alastair Campbell told you. Do you know why the cover of my book is pink?
Go on.
You should know this, it's the only colour that's never been owned by a political party.
That's a very good point.
There you go.
And yet some Tories are using pink in their election.
Because they don't want to use blue.
They don't use blue.
Yeah.
Before we talk about your books, and we will give you a proper hearing on your books, Alastair, when you were working for Blair and we had election campaigns, I used to go from one press conference to another. Labour, Lib Dem, Tory, 5 days a week. It meant the politicians were subjected to real scrutiny. That's gone now. We get occasionally a politician will take 6 questions, but you can go days without them being subjected to that scrutiny. Do you think that's something that the public are being denied, in a sense? Because we ask the questions on their behalf.
I mean, I understand why the press conference thing has sort of faded away a bit, because 24 News means that the politicians are doing much more access through television than they used to. But I do think this campaign has lacked really intense grilling. I hope the TV debate tonight will be better than those so far. I think with Michel Hussein in the chair, it might be. But, you know, just to take an example, I think your star here, Mr Farage, has not been subject to any real scrutiny of policy. I don't think he'd sustain a real press conference on policy because he comes up with numbers that don't add up. He comes up with promises.
He admits that.
Yeah, but that's what's wrong with our politics.
Yeah, but
you can't stand for election and say, I'm saying these things, but I know they don't add up.
But if you looked at the Institute of Fiscal Studies this week, they say both political frontbench manifestos, the sums don't add up. He said the Tory sums are worse than the Labour ones, but he said there's a big deficit. That's not fair on the voters, is it? The public.
And they are being challenged over that. But what you get with the press conference, what you get with that real sort of intense grilling where you keep coming back to the same question again and again, you get to a place where the public can make a judgment. Are they sort of telling me the truth? Are they not? Whereas I think what you have now are politicians who are very, very skilled at kind of batting stuff off. The other thing that's happened with this campaign in particular is the stuff that, like, Sunak launching it the way that he did.
In
the rain, with things can only get better, playing beautifully in the background.
Did you rate?
No, Steve Bray.
Are you sure?
I don't believe in the honour system, but he deserves the knighthood. He did it. But that's the guy with the blue Brexit hat who's still campaigning against Brexit, as am I. And then you've got then you had the D-Day thing, which was just terrible. And now this betting thing, which I think a lot of people are just thinking, I can't quite believe this is happening. But my big worry about this election is that people think it's all over and they won't have to vote. The only way to get a change of government is to vote for a change of government, and people have got to get out.
Have you not seen the polls? They've not moved. Now, you and I know normally, whoever the governing party is, the polls start to narrow, and normally it starts 2 weeks before. We're now 8 days before. There's been no narrowing.
No, but I still worry that a lot of people who get stopped in the street or phoned by a pollster, how are you going to vote? I worry whether they're all going to vote because they think everybody else is going to vote, because they see the polls. The reason I've written these books is because I really worry that the turnout's going down and down, apathy's going up and up. And if we're not careful, particularly if Trump gets back, by the way, because I think democracy itself is then in peril, I think that what happens then, if turnout just keeps going down, you take democracy for granted. John Major, who, as you know, I used to be very, very critical of when he was Prime Minister, he made a brilliant speech.
He said he shoved his shirt in his underpants. You had no evidence for that.
Just don't go there.
You had no evidence for that.
Just don't go there. Andrew, if you want to talk about underpants...
Come on, move on.
OK, right.
Move on.
So, but he made a brilliant speech called In Democracy We Trust, question mark. This was when Johnson was in charge. And he was warning that if you don't take care, democracy and democratic institutions can fade very, very quickly. And I worry about the extent of normalisation of lying in politics. I think is a real problem. I think media bias is a real problem. I think the extent to which, even in this campaign, you've seen an example of it where Sunak, who promised professionalism, integrity, accountability, keeps doubling down on the £2,000, and then on this betting thing.
Yeah.
Just cannot see that the public just think this is wrong, deal with it now.
Suspended him immediately.
Totally.
But to go back to what I think one of the reasons turnout is falling, people look at the two main parties and think, what's the difference? What is the big difference? Labour are going, we're not going to raise income tax, we're not going to raise these taxes. How are they going to bring the changes that are needed to the NHS? Or how are they going to stimulate economic growth, Alistair, if they're not going to raise some taxes?
Well, they're putting a lot of their eggs in the growth basket.
Well, that's what Liz Truss did.
No, Liz Truss tried to. She promised these massive unfunded tax
Yeah, but what if
cuts.
we don't get the growth?
If you don't get the growth, then Labour have got problems. And the reason why they're focusing on the planning system, which is going to be very, very hard, by the way. No, that is important.
Yeah, but come on,
and the way that
how are they going to change the planning system?
they're going to change the planning system by indicating, as to be fair to them, they have done, it is going to change. And if they get a mandate to change it, they can change it. I remember the very first time in Downing Street, I saw a note about plans for a third runway at Heathrow. Do you know when it was?
No.
1998.
That's ridiculous.
And we're still talking about it. How many airports have the Chinese built in
Don't forget, Boris Johnson is going to sit in front of...
He's going to go in front of it. And Boris Johnson, a man who your paper supported so vividly.
Of course.
Man of truth and integrity.
And he won a massive majority.
He won a massive majority because he
suspect...
lied about Brexit and because he was up against Corbyn.
Let's not reheat Brexit, because your party, Labour, are not wanting to talk about Brexit in this...
I agree. I am, though.
Because Keir Starmer was the architect of the second referendum, which you agreed with.
Well, I think I was more of an architect than he was, because he took a long time to persuade him to back it.
But you talked about truth and integrity. Isn't part of the problem people like you, when you were spin doctors, are brought in to mould the message? Years ago, we didn't have all these spin doctors. You were part of the problem. I really don't buy that. When I was doing the job, I was always more concerned about the public than the media. The media in our democracy, particularly if you're from the left of centre, they're a real obstacle to getting stuff done, because they're out to get you the whole time. And what I was determined to do was to make sure that Tony Blair did not go the same way as Neil Kinnock in terms of getting absolutely destroyed by the media. Much more important was the strategy. And what you're seeing with Sunak is he doesn't know the difference between strategy and tactics. So, and when we talk, this whole thing about spin so overblown, the real spin doctors in our culture are the journalists. They're the ones with the agenda. Politicians have to work that. They have to get round it. But so I don't buy that. And if I can tell you, the best soundbite of all time was Julius Caesar, Veni Vidi Vici. The Ten Commandments is one of the best pieces of strategic communication ever. So modern communication goes back to the beginning of time. But what we now have is a much harder media landscape. And it's become even harder because of social media, because of stuff like this, 24/7 news, etc. Before, I'll ask you one question, because people will be shouting and say, well, yeah, what about Alastair Campbell and the dodgy dossier in Iraq? The dodgy dossier. That would be your political epitaph, wouldn't it?
No, well, it might be with you, Andrew, but I really don't believe that. I think if that was the case, well, first of all, just on the facts...
Yeah. There were no efforts of mass destruction. 6
inquiries, no wrongdoing on my part. So, and we can rehearse if you want, but and added to which, I think the public have respect for people who just keep going because they know what they believe, and I know what I believe. So there's a reason, I think, why our podcast is the #1 in the country. It's because Rory Stewart and I come from different parts of politics. We talk reasonably, we talk in a grown-up way about serious stuff, and people broadly believe that we say what we think. Now, Farage says what he thinks. I think he's just a sort of pantomime show. And by the way, I think it's ridiculous he won that award last night, because if this is not a news channel, how can he be news presenter of the...
He won the television and radio industry.
Yeah, because he organised the vote.
But it's been this organisation has been around since 1931. They know the rules and regulations. They decided he can be in there. Ed Balls is a former cabinet minister. He presents on another channel.
Yeah, but Ed Balls isn't a serving politician.
But he was until very recently. He was cabinet minister.
But Nigel Farage is a serving politician.
David Lammy was doing a breakfast show on LBC while he was shadow foreign secretary.
I've got no problem with people doing the shows. I don't believe that Nigel Farage should be... The defence of GB News for not being regulated in the same way as others, is that it's, quote, not a news channel.
Public vote.
How can he be...
Public vote. You're all in favour of voting.
A public vote organised by Nigel Farage's mates.
Well, it's a public vote. It's about, let's talk about... We're going to talk about your book shortly. Keir Starmer's given an interview today to my newspaper, the Daily Mail. You must be horrified. Talking to the Daily Mail. He's got to engage with us. He says he's going to move the family into the flat above number 10. What's that going to be like for his family? Because you know Blair had young children, then Leo came along too. It's a goldfish bowl. How difficult is it him to have a normal family life?
It's very, very hard. And I think I actually really admire Keir and his wife Vic for the way that they have made a decision. Nobody's going to know who their kids are. That's going to be hard. And the newspapers, you know, they should respect that.
Well, we did.
To be fair,
there were
things
that happened in the Blair's time with
absolutely.
His family, which we did not report.
No, there was some stuff that we could have quibbled with, which we did. But in general, I think if you make a principled position... I mean, Keir's wife, Vic, she's very funny, she's very attractive, she's got a good job, she's good at it, she's a really nice woman. If she was on the campaign trail... she'd be a, quote, asset, right? But they've decided no, because the far bigger issue is to protect their children, which I totally respect. I think we all should. But answers your question, it's not a great place to live. It really isn't a great place to live. Your friends can't just come and go. You're surrounded by
Is he making a mistake in your view?
No, I don't think he's got any choice, because I don't believe that if he becomes Prime Minister, I don't believe that the security people would allow him not to live there.
Right.
Because if, for example, when Tony Blair became Prime Minister, I think his kids and Cherie would have preferred to have stayed in Islington. The police said that the cost and the inconvenience to other people of now securing this place is going to be too high. And so they had to move into Downing Street. And it's, look, you've been there, I think a lot of our world leaders come to Downing Street and they get through the famous black door and think...
I mean, I've been to the Elysee Palace and you've got liveried staff in Paris.
I'll tell you, if you go to the Moncloa in Madrid, if you go to the White House, if you go to the Chancellery in Berlin, we are not... It's not a very good working building and it's not a great living building. But I think Keir's, if he wins, he's absolutely determined just to do the job, to return politics to public service, and that means if part of the job is that you've got to live there, you've got to live there.